Are you sick of government lackeys who say you didn't build that? Are you tired of elitists who think you need a government permission slip for everything? Everything you do is an A to B conversation, and the government should see their way out of it. Create true free markets by adopting the BIPCOT No Government License. The BIPCOT No Gov license allows use or modification of any product, service, or software except by governments or government agents. Go to bipcot.org. That's Bravo, India, Papa, Charlie, Oscar, Tango.org.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Peaceful Podcast. I'm Jessica Pavoni, and today we have a special guest, our very first non-military or non-military affiliated guest, Danilo Cuellar. He's a fellow parent of two, fellow anarchist voluntarist, and a peaceful parent of two. I believe we first met maybe through the Tom Woods show. I honestly can't even remember by now, but Danilo, thank you so much for coming on, and it's a pleasure to have you.
No problem. Yeah, I heard about you first through the Tom Woods show, and after that, I'm like, I put you down as a possible guest. I'm like, I gotta contact these people, but it was a while before I actually did. I think you commented under one of my posts, and I'm like, you're the same. Aren't you the same person?
Yeah.
So
the internet's good for helping find your tribe.
Yeah. So thank you for that. See, you encouraged me. You know, lit the fire under my butt. You're like, all right, get this going. Come on.
No, it's a good thing. So I'm honored to have you on our little podcast today. And we're going to discuss something a little bit different, although it's definitely tied to peace and justice and caring for others and whatnot. But instead of talking about conscientious objection and avoiding warfare and reasons to leave it, I want to discuss a philosophy that ultimately led me to leave the military, and that would be voluntarism and following the non-aggression principle, which you would understand very well. So before we get started, I was hoping you could give our listeners just a little bit of a personal background and tell us who is Danilo and why do you have something important to say to us?
Yeah, I hope I have something important to say. Got a podcast. But yeah, I mean, I grew up as not really interested in politics. My mother was more my mother's family is more Democrat, left-leaning, and so they would vote for every Democrat, but I didn't really care. And growing up in high school, I learned a lot of stuff. The most valuable things I learned in high school were outside of government school, right? All these books, chess and piano and theoretical physics and cosmology and astronomy and philosophy, Eastern Western philosophy, and alternative medicine, which led me down the path of Chinese medicine with acupuncture, Chinese herbs, and Eastern nutrition and massage, and then that I started looking more into nutrition and alternative nutrition. Nutritional therapies, including like Gerson therapy and alternative cancer therapies, and then Monsanto, and then vaccines and GMOs, and then and so it led me along. So I entered this through the nutritional path, and so I was interested in that, and then in Monsanto, a big one, right? And so everybody hates Monsanto, I guess rightfully so, but and then I began to realize like, wait a minute, so all these corporations are pretty bad, but how do they have all this power, right? Mm-hmm. There's a common thread to them, right? In that all of them appeal to sovereign immunity by the state, right? They are all protected by legislation, by regulation, by all the barriers to entry that destroy their competition, so when people advocate for more regulation, more laws, tax the rich, tax these corporations, they're like, bring it on. I love it. Give it to me, right? Because I can take it, but my competitors can't take it. Yep. And people have it's kind of confused, the Occupy Wall Street people and the Bernie Sanders people and all that. So I didn't realize that until later, until I started studying more about government, the nature of politics, and I first got into Creature from Jekyll Island, Edward Griffin.
It's a good book.
Oh, awesome book! Yeah, I remember. It's funny when you first learned about this stuff. I don't know if you went through this, but I got so excited and I was calling up my cousin, my mother, and I was like, "You gotta see what is in this book. This is so awesome." There's four stages of money. It's commodity. It's what is it? It's receipt. It's fractional, and then it's fiat, and then there's central banking, and then the Federal Reserve, and it's all crap. And it started in 1913. And I was so excited to tell my mother, and everybody's like, whoa, slow down. You're talking crazy now.
What got into Danilo?
I know. And I remember my cousin who didn't really care about that stuff, and he's like, Danilo, it's all right, calm down. So that's the initial, excited, with this new information phase. And then I started reading more Larken Rose, and then also about unschooling, like Alfie Kohn, unconditional parenting, I think that is. A little bit of the Continuum Concept.
Sure.
What's her name? Jean Lideloff, I think. So and then Larken Rose, and then there's other ones like the Morrison, Linda Tannehill.
Yes.
What's it called?
Market for Liberty.
Market for Liberty. I read that like twice, which is very rare for me.
It's great and short.
Yeah, it's so powerful, so detailed and packed, and it's just amazing read. And it's amazing that it was written like in 1970s, and it's pretty relevant even today. Because information is timeless. But yeah, so that's what really got me thinking about all this stuff, and so my in was not only the nutritional aspect, but also economics and precious metals and central banking and Federal Reserve, right? That's what really fascinated me, like the history of precious metals. Why was precious metals so dominant in history? Why the central banks? Why were they so threatened, and governments too? Why are they so threatened by precious metals, right? Because they are a restraint, on the state,
That's a good word for it.
Say again?
That's a good word for it. Things you don't learn in school.
Yeah. So precious metals, and so I remember when I was in my acupuncture clinic, and I would assess the patients, see, ask them certain questions, see if they're like open to this information, and then I would go into my, and then I would close the door, and I would just like sit down with the patient. I'm like, all right, and I took out a dollar bill, and I explained how much you can learn just from a dollar bill, like. Over the top it says Federal Reserve note. What does that mean, right? Because everybody calls this a dollar bill, right? But what is historically a dollar, right? A dollar, according to the Constitution, if you go by that, it's like a certain amount of grains of gold and silver, right? Yep. And then later on, it was more specific. Like $1 became a receipt for gold, right? $20. 1 ounce of gold was equal to $20, right? 1/20 of an ounce of gold is $1, and then that just degenerated as the Federal Reserve was printing. It became one ounce for every $50, and then
now you're fractionated,
and now it's just nothing. So yeah, so it was worth. It could be exchanged for gold. Like you could take a $20 bill, go to the bank, and say, "Give me my gold." You could do that. And nobody knows that, right? And that's what I used to tell them. I'm like, can you imagine taking this money and going to the bank and you can get gold? Like everyone's like, what? So I just love teaching people about economics because, and about monetary system because not many people know about it. And I really, I think what Henry Ford said was so true that if the people knew how the monetary system works, there would be a revolution before tomorrow. Yep. Right?
Yeah. That was a really apt quote.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And so I try, that's one thing that I like to tell people because I find that there are certain topics with people that are very hot and contentious, right? Like immigration. Like everybody's got an opinion on immigration. Taxes. Most people have opinion on taxes. What else? Maybe the school system. A lot of people have opinion on that. Maybe foreign policy. A lot of people have opinion on terrorists. Get the terrorists. All this kind of stuff. But who cares? Who cares about fiscal policy in the monetary system? Nobody knows. Nobody cares.
It's so boring.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you're getting robbed every single day. And and Janet Yellen comes on TV and she's like, "Don't worry, our focus is for 2% inflation per year. We're gonna meet that goal." And everyone's like, "Yay!"
It's a little insane, I was surprised after I read From Jekyll Island how little that I actually knew, and I never cared about that stuff until my husband got me into it, and he read Jekyll Island first and was like, "Oh my gosh!" When we first talked about fractionated banking, it was like, well, that doesn't make much sense. You dig a little deeper and you find we've been getting fleeced for so long.
Yeah, yeah. And the idea that banks, I mean, the Federal Reserve can create money out of thin air or create currency out of thin air. That's the other thing I like to distinguish is the difference between currency and money. And I don't know if you read Mike Maloney's book. It's called Rich Dad's Guide to Investing in Precious Metals.
I haven't read that one.
Oh, such an awesome book. Yeah, really great. And yeah, he goes into specifics about, what's the difference between currency and money. And he also made a great mini documentary series called The Hidden Secrets of Money. And he made like 6 episodes so far. Each episode is like half hour. Awesome. Very educational.
Well, so unpack that in a couple of sentences, currency versus money for anybody listening.
So basically currency has how many? I forget how many attributes. It's a medium of exchange. It's a unit of account. It's portable, durable, fungible, which means it's interchangeable. $1 in my pocket buys the same as $1 in your pocket, and divisible. Right? Those characteristics: medium of exchange, unit of account, and all the other ones. That's currency. That's every single fiat currency on the planet has those characteristics. There has been countless currencies in the past that have fit that category, like tobacco, like lumber, like nails, copper, sugar, salt, spices.
Pelts.
Say again?
Animal pelts.
Animal pelts, beads, bird feathers, cigarettes, stamps, candy in prison. So many different things. I mean, and
act as a currency.
Yeah, even animal, what do you call it? Shells from the ocean, right? And so, for whatever reason, most of them were abandoned, right? Because they didn't fit those common characteristics of currency. Like let's say for shells, right? So a tribe that lived near the ocean, it wouldn't make sense for them to use shells, right? Because they're using shells, and then you're saving in shells, and then you got a big wave, a tsunami brings all shells from the ocean, and your savings of shells are worthless, right? Got
hyperinflation,
immediate hyperinflation, right? So yeah, so it really matters the proximity of where you're living. It depends on what currency they're using. And so they came and went, and it turned out that through free trade, people just trading and choosing, merchants and businessmen choosing what is the most effective medium of exchange. Sure. Gold and silver just rose to the top naturally, right? Yep. It's just it doesn't rot, doesn't putrefy, doesn't go bad. It can be stored for very long periods of time. Resists rust, so many things. So. There's
a limited supply of it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Scarcity. That's another thing. Yeah. Right. It can't be destroyed. So, and I was thinking actually, because not even if you think about it, not even gold and silver is perfect, right? It's so far, it's the best. But can you? Okay, let me ask you this. Let me give you a little test question. Can you think of a situation where gold and silver would not work, like would be devalued, like quickly?
I guess if they ever figured out how to manufacture it would be one.
Okay.
Which has been tried many times.
Right.
When you say it couldn't work, I think of, hey, my gold is in Colorado and I happen to be in California when all hell breaks loose.
Okay. All right. So yeah. That's the one downside is it's.
But I'm not answering your question. So what's the?
So one possibility I thought of was, what if an asteroid hits Earth from space that's loaded with gold and silver?
Sure, that would change things.
Immediate hyperinflation right there, right?
Yeah.
So everybody's value would go down of their savings, right? So what I'm saying is, not even gold and silver is immune to these market forces, right? So it's just to say that so far it's the best. Sure. Okay. So those things were currency, right? So now the difference with currency and money, the very special attribute that makes something money is increases value over time, is a store of value over time, right? Which currencies are not at all. Fiat currencies or even those other currencies, sugar, deteriorates, like spices. Yeah, it's just like they're not good over long periods of time. It's very difficult. Either they can't be divisible, they can't be portable. They're not durable. They break down for whatever reason. So they have to satisfy all those attributes plus be a stores of value, and gold and silver really has risen to the top. So So I taught my son. He's now going to be 6 by next week, and I've brought him to the gold and silver shop when I go shopping, and it's fun for him, because he gets to play with the coins, and he loves it. He loves counting them, and I show him the ding test. You got to figure out if it's counterfeit or not.
That's pretty neat. It's good for him too, though. I think Simon Black and Peter Schiff were kind of the two people that inspired us to get gold.
Awesome. Yeah. So I got.
You teach your patients this sort of stuff. How does that go over?
Well, I do it in secret because I don't think my boss wouldn't want me having, he wouldn't want me having such how do you say, controversial conversations with the patients.
Sure.
But that's why I assess these people. I don't do it to everybody because some people get offended, or I don't know, they're bored or whatever. But there are some people that are really, really interested. They're like, wow, I didn't think of it like that, you could even continue like with the dollar bill. Like, why does it have a serial number? Why is it signed by the U.S. Treasury? If it's part of the Federal Reserve made it, but the U.S. Treasury signed it, right? Why is that? And then I like to tell them that $1, the paper, the ink, and then transported and stored costs roughly 6 cents, right? For $1. That's what I tell them. Now, how much do you think it costs them to print, with the ink and the paper, and then transport and store $100 bill? What would you say?
6 cents.
No, 7 cents, because you got an extra zero, right? You need a little bit more ink, right?
I guess so.
and then I tell them that, they're like, their eyes like what? Like in shock. Like, that's what I'm killing myself for? Is this paper with ink? And so it's really important to realize how much of a scam the whole thing is. And that's there's one episode Mike Maloney does. It's episode 4, which is I think it's the biggest scam of all time, which he basically talks about money creation. How does money creation actually happen at the Federal Reserve? And in the words of there's a book, I think it's called Modern Money Mechanics, that's written by one of the Federal Reserve branches, like the Boston Federal Reserve branch in the 1960s. And there's a quote which says, if a private citizen writes a check, there has to be funds in the bank to withdraw the money for that check, right? But if the Federal Reserve writes a check, it's creating currency.
Like, that's it sounds like a pretty benign statement until you actually understand the mechanics of what's going on behind that, and like what that means for average Joe and the dollars in his pocket.
Oh yeah, and
that's a good word for it. The biggest scam ever.
Oh yeah.
Honestly, let's go on a tangent here, because when you said the biggest, the greatest scam of all time, I immediately thought of the most dangerous superstition of all time.
Right.
Which is a little bit of a sidebar, but I know you've mentioned Larken Rose a couple times.
Yeah.
I follow him as well. I'm very impressed by what he puts out. So
yeah.
For those of you listening who have not heard of Larken Rose, that's Larken. Larken Rose wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition, and it's basically the myth and the belief of authority. And Danilo, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with it, so hash that out a little bit more. And when did you just Larken?
Yeah. I think I first heard about him through his YouTube channel, and I saw a bunch of his videos. Really awesome videos. Awesome way he presents things, very clearly understood. Clear to understand for everybody. And then he wrote this book, and this book, it like really focuses on the belief in authority and how it's illegitimate, and he just that's really the main focus of the book. And he goes, he describes that in different ways, but I think it's very well written. He talks about the Milgram experiments, Stanley Milgram experiments, which is the when they used electrocution. It's like they used people from the street, and they basically told them you're going to test this person, and if they get it wrong, then you're going to deliver an electric shock, and then they increase the electric shock as they get more and more wrong answers. But of course, the test subject is a fake, right? But they don't know that; they think it's real.
Yep.
And then eventually, the test subject stops responding, stops saying exclaiming that they're in pain. But then they turn to the authority, the man in the white coat, and the guy says, "Please continue," and so they do. So it just illustrates the belief in authority. If there's an authority figure that is willing to take the blame, then people can do really horrific things. Even everyday, decent, moral people, they consider themselves moral, but if they have this belief in authority, it's sad. Oh my God, it's really tragic.
I feel like the best summation of what I've learned from Larken Rose, he's got a quote that I'll paraphrase. It says, I'm not afraid of the Hitlers and the Maos and the Stalins. I'm afraid of the thousands upon thousands of people that believe them into power, that are willing to follow these directives from some crazy guy with a mustache. It's and that's really an accurate statement. I mean, that's really what it is. And we say these things like, oh, somebody was a good law-abiding citizen, and it's like, well, what does that really mean? It's become so commonplace that we don't really think about what that means. And Larken has been really illuminating for me anyway to figure that out and just discuss this myth and authority. So
oh, he's awesome. Yeah, he's really great to show people. Like I use his video "If You Were King" very often to people.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's an awesome one about basically describing why there can be no such thing as a benevolent ruler that can do no wrong.
This sounds interesting. I'll have to Google that.
Oh yeah. I mean, basically that even if let's say a ruler's in power and he says, all right, I'm going to force everybody by law to eat their vegetables, And then he's like, well, what if some guy doesn't want to eat their vegetables? What are you going to do? You're going to beat him? You're going to cage him? What are you going to do? You're going to get your enforcers? Doesn't matter what it is. It could be the nicest thing. It's always backed by force. Forcing people to do exercise because exercise is healthy, and then even he's like, and then after all that, he's like, now, and eventually the ruler realizes, okay, anything I do is backed by force. He's like, so I'm not going to do anything. So he retreats into his castle, but then he realizes what? But even just living there, he's surviving on taxes, which is itself a form of violation of consent and violence. So, so therefore, there can never be any benevolent or philosopher king, as Plato would say. There's no such thing. That the idea of a ruler is inherently immoral and unjust.
Yeah. And that's what anarchy really means.
Yeah.
It's not or that's one of them anyway. That's not the typical picture people have when they hear this word anarchy or anarchist. And so along those lines, you and I have discussed this before, but we both like to use the A word. And to you, how would you define it?
Yeah. So when I usually I don't bring that word up the first, immediately because it does scare some people. But I usually go through the back door, ask questions, ask them about, basically their morality and things like that. And then eventually like, wait a minute, are you some kind of anarchist or something? or if I advocate for I'm like, I don't think you should pay taxes. I mean, I think you should avoid taxes at all costs. And like, but how is the government supposed to run? Exactly. You got it right.
Yeah.
And so basically what I say is and then eventually when they stumble upon the idea of anarchy, that's what I'm talking about. They're like, well, of course their mind goes off in these little tangents and speculations, who's going to build the roads and feed the poor and, house the homeless and, take care of the elderly and the sick, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, all right, forget about all that. All right. You can just get lost in those rabbit holes and those confusions. It's not a fruitful conversation. So the way I say is I'm just talking to you. Okay. Forget about everybody else. I'm just talking to you. Do you have a conscience? Do you have morality? Do you understand what morality is? Would you do something immoral if somebody told you to do so? And if not, then that's great. That's it. That's all I'm saying. Live and be responsible for the consequences of your actions. That's it. That's all I advocate for people to do. And I like, my message. I try to simplify as much as possible because I think it's too easy to get complicated, and I think that's counterproductive. People get lost in the complications, and the more we simplify our message, the more it's understood by people who are trying to grasp it.
Sure. So on that note, I want to talk a little bit about the non-aggression principle, because that's really what changed my life, stumbling across it. And I know you're running a Peaceful Parenting, and the non-aggression principle plays into that. So for our listeners, could you please define the non-aggression principle, and then tell me some of the projects you've been doing or how basically you've incorporated it into your life?
Yeah, so before I met Dave Painter from the Seize Liberty podcast, I used to refer to that as the like the golden rule, treat others as you would want to be treated. But then Dave's like, no, that's actually not good, right? Because it's
the silver rule?
What if? Yeah, right. It's like, what if you're a masochist, right? And you enjoy being beaten and tortured and enslaved. Yeah. All right, that's all right. You're right. All right, maybe don't treat others the way you don't want to be treated. Maybe that's better. Yeah, it's gotta be a nitpicker, But for the most part, I think most people I would assume are not masochists. Yeah. and so basically, another way I like to describe it is. I guess voluntarism in general is having voluntary consensual interactions between peaceful people, right? That's what anarchy is, right? It's not some crazy nightmare from a movie that was Hollywood made to try to,
Everybody's wearing sweatshirts and carrying crowbars.
Right. Yeah. I mean that is that's more chaos as a result of a immediate collapse of the state, perhaps. But anarchy itself is all around us, right? When you choose to hang out with people that you enjoy their company, that's anarchy. When you choose to have a family with somebody, nobody told you to do that. When you select a profession, nobody told you to do that. What time you want to wake up? What do you want to eat for breakfast? What do you want to wear today? That's anarchy. It's nothing like it's nothing spectacular. So
that's that's an easy way of putting it too. Yeah. I like the word voluntarism as well, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's it's voluntary consensual interaction between peaceful people, and I think that pretty much covers all the bases. That one, it's not good to coerce people or infringe upon them, or certainly not to aggress against them, but the voluntary part is like, well, what do you want for breakfast? Like you said, what are you gonna wear? Like everybody is going to make different choices that way. So
right,
it just made a lot of sense to me when I first came across it. But
it's so self-evident. It's like why didn't I think of this before? Like how could I have thought any other way? Yeah, and it's so simple. And that's what I love about it, the simplicity of it. And of course, the state is the one giant 800-pound hairy gorilla in the room that doesn't adhere to that principle. But everybody's like, but that's different. That it doesn't apply to that gorilla. It applies to us, but not the gorilla. Like, that's different.
Yeah.
So that's
also
God.
From that, and like taking one step like further on the spectrum, or I guess closer to what we're discussing is really like, what is the most proper, most moral way for people to live with each other? Like what sort of governance, if any, is the one that allows people the most freedom, the most opportunity to flourish and whatnot? And I think you and I would agree that like voluntarism is probably the answer. I haven't come across anything better yet that has convinced me. But one thing that's pretty compelling for a lot of people is this idea of Minarchism. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
This is essentially when people say, hey, we need to have some sort of governance, but it needs to be limited. And a lot of times it's called, the night watchman state. We'll have a small government. Its only roles are, defense of the people and, the military and the courts most often are what a lot of people kind of fall into that camp. Would you rebut Minarchism? And if so, how and why? Am I saying that word right? Or is it minarchism?
No, Minarchism. Yeah, I think that's how you say it. So, I mean, the first thing I'll probably say is, the United States, was the experiment of the smallest minarchist state
Yeah.
in history, and it has grown to be the largest, Leviathan military industrial complex, that's been terrorizing the entire planet. So I would safely say it failed.
You remind me of the Lysander Spooner quote. He says, the Constitution, whether it, oh shoot, how does it go? He's saying like, it's not fit to exist because it has created the government we now have or has failed to prevent it.
Right.
And that's what you just reminded me of. It's like we started small with this great little document. It was an awesome effort, but look what it's turned into over the course of 250 years.
Yeah. I mean, I think some minarchists, if you would say that, they would say, well, because you'd say, well, you see, your Constitution failed you, see, and then they'll be like, well, of course, it's just a piece of paper, it's us, it's up to us to defend the piece of paper. And I'm like, why are you defending a piece of paper? Just live for yourselves. Forget about the piece of paper. It's not important, okay? You don't need a piece of paper to tell you what your rights are, okay? Everybody has natural rights that a piece of paper or politicians or state officials didn't have to grant them.
Yeah.
Because I forget who said it. Maybe Voltaire. He's like, the state. If a state is powerful enough to give you your rights, it's also powerful enough to take away your rights. Yep. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's that's one thing. And the other thing is philosophically understanding what is government, right? Because this is the other thing when I talk to people is make the distinction between government and business, private enterprise. There's a big difference, but everybody blends the two because because they consider like a government job as a regular job, and I'm like, no, it's a big difference.
Yeah.
I'm like, the private enterprise job, that's created out of demand, right? And it's created out of voluntary exchange, and if it's no longer needed, it's it just vanishes, right? You can't keep it alive with guns, right? Or coercion or violence. Whereas the government job, and the government job is created out of force, right? And coercion and violence, and there's no demand whatsoever. It actually creates its own artificial demand, right, through taxation with the violence and everything. But yeah, it's a big difference, right? I think we always have to distinguish that. Like also another common false dichotomy is people blend civilization with the state, right? Yeah. They're like, look at everything that we have, all these wonderful cities, all this technology. Look at this phone, look at this laptop. We can talk. That's all because of the government. That's the state. How can you hate the state? Look at everything that we have. And I'm like, no, you got it all wrong. The productive people are the host. They're like the people who are actually working, creating, innovating, and trading freely, peacefully, right? That's the host, and the state is the parasite. It's the leech that fastens itself onto the host, slowly withdrawing and sucking away the life energy and life force out of the host, right? And if the parasite gets too large, the host dies, and then there's no more state, right? So people always there's one. I remember one person asked the question like, what came first, the state or the civilization, right? The productive people, and you can't have the host before the parasite. You see the host first, and the parasite finds the host, right? Yep. So yeah.
You reminded me too. I want to go back to this distinction between governments and business too, because I think it's an important one. And me working for a government paycheck for almost 15 years. Thank you, by the way. You see the difference in like a business has an incentive to make a profit to provide a good or service that is actually usable. And there are restraints and checks and balances on that system where when you have a government system, like you said, they create artificial demand. They basically got a captive income force or income source, sorry.
Yeah.
And it's just that, that quote I just saw the other day, I think it was Bob Higgs says no, it was Oscar Wilde. The bureaucracy is expanding to meet the needs of an expanding bureaucracy. And it's like, that's exactly what
funny.
government is. Like, that's exactly what it's doing. Like, it's not providing useful goods or useful services. There's no incentive to provide a good product. There's no customer feedback. They're not going out of business. You know, the post service has been held afloat for
Yep.
I don't know how long, but
Right.
I mean, that's just such an important distinction. I think people know, and they, you know, we've got the phrase, "Oh, it's good enough for government work." I mean, so there's this idea out there that it's inefficient and it's wasteful and it's ineffective, but that's as far as most people take it. Like, I don't think they really draw the distinction then between like why are business and government different, and why is one like a net positive as opposed to the other.
Yeah, and the other thing I think, if people confuse those two things, I'd like to ask them is, have you ever owned a business? Do you know anybody that owns a business? Because
Sure.
if you do, then you understand how difficult it is to create a business, create value, products and services that people want to buy, and you put all that,
Yep.
capital and sweat and effort, and then the government comes in, the state comes in, and steals 40% or 50%. And there's one quote by Erwin Schiff, which is, every entrepreneur has an unwilling partner that
Yep.
it's like contributes no work, contributes no money.
Yeah.
And then claims to own like 40% or 50% of the profits.
Worst business partner in the world, Uncle Sam.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's so important for us to emphasize, the illegitimacy and the immorality of the state, right? Because it's not only, like you said, if it's good, it's good enough for government. Like so, I guess some people recognize that it's ineffective, but it's not only ineffective, it's immoral and it's unjust. Sure. And the greatest atrocities in history have happened, in the name of the state. Right? Another thing that Larken Rose says really well is that, the people that have committed the greatest atrocities were not individuals, not individual murderers or psychopaths or rapists. They were people acting in the name of the state, just doing their job, right?
Yeah.
Just following orders, right?
It's a terrifying thing. And, when you discuss philosophy with people, like they put all these burdens on, anarchism or whatever, and, oh, how's it going to prevent this? Or it's going to be mayhem. And Robert Higgs says, any mayhem that's the result of an anarchistic society is like purely conjectural. Yeah. But the mayhem that results from a statist society is already known.
Right.
We already know how bad it can be. There's been a Mao, there's been a Stalin, there's been a Hitler, there's been countless other examples of state-sponsored violence. It's a broken system.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's nice to actually name all of them. Like, apartheid was part of the state. Chain slavery, part of the, sanctioned by the state.
Sure.
All the world wars, mass murdering enterprises, part of the state. All the democides and all the communist countries that you hear in the 20th century, part of the state.
Atomic bombs.
Go down the list. Yeah. I mean, genocide of the Native Americans, part of the, as a function of the state. Genocide of the Aboriginals in Australia, part of the state.
Yeah.
So, the list goes on, and it's just amazing how deep the only word to say it is indoctrination, right? Because you really have to be indoctrinated in order to overlook these massive crimes of history, crimes against humanity, and just shrug them off and say, like, well, they did socialism wrong, but we're going to do it better with Bernie Sanders.
Oh, that's an interesting turn, with Venezuela in the position that it's in right now, and a lot of the Bernie people not really understanding what they're advocating for. And I think Bernie's a little unique. Like, he actually seems like an honest, if highly misguided man. I think there's just this big lack of understanding on his part and his supporters' parts, unfortunately. That's just really appealing to people.
I don't really try to figure out if a politician is being sincere or insincere, because in the end, it really doesn't matter, because
Yeah.
it's like regardless, there will be damage done.
Yeah.
Whichever puppet is in power, there will be damage
Right.
done. Regardless if it's with good intentions.
Yep.
And I'm inclined to believe that things happen regardless of who the puppet is in power. things just go along. The train will keep going.
Oh, I mean, dude, people's memories are like 4 years long. Like every 4 years, I'm like, oh, this is the one that's going to change it all. And it's like, you say that every 4 years.
This time. Yeah.
This time it's for real. So
Right.
Also,
Go ahead, yeah.
question: do you vote?
Oh, the last time I voted was 2008, which was for Obama. And the only reason I voted for Obama again was because my mother is a Democrat, and she's like, and I didn't really care about voting. I'm like, she's like, you gonna vote? I'm like, yeah. She's like, vote. Who should I vote for? Obama. All right, I'll vote for Obama. So I didn't really care. But after that, learning more about it and learning I wrote an article called "Voting is Violence," and
cool. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, it's on the Daily Anarchist. I wrote a couple of articles for them.
Sure.
But yeah, so I came to that conclusion that using the political process to impose your will upon your neighbor is really a pretty nasty thing. It's a pretty immoral thing to do. You wouldn't violently subjugate your neighbor for whatever reason, but it's acceptable to use a political process to attempt to do that. Now,
Sure.
Now whether or not that's effective or not, I don't know. I tend to think it's ineffective, but just the intention of, even if it is effective, it's still immoral.
Yep.
So there's multiple reasons why I don't vote. Apart from the fact that I think I can do a much better job at improving the world by just staying home on that day and playing, Connect Four with my kids. I think that will produce more good in the world. So yeah. so voting, no. And you know what's funny? I meet up with a lot of homeschooling families. And a lot of them are kind of inclined to hearing these conversations because they're already questioning the education system, right? And so you got. I'm like, if the government can't do education right, what do you think about everything else?
Yeah.
So slowly
What about healthcare?
Right,
what about
right.
Foreign policy. What about your privacy?
Right, everything else, and so I think a lot of them are kind of open to it. But also I've noticed that a lot of homeschoolers, or that I've met anyway, are Bernie Sanders supporters, which is quite interesting.
Really? That is interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. But...
I know, me neither. And I mean, they like they like farmers markets and stuff, and so yeah, I guess I don't know, but yeah, so.
Markets. I'm not a Bernie supporter, but
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm just saying I don't know what it is about. I mean, I don't know, the hippie. I don't know.
Yeah, I have a feeling like all the Bernie supporters, like right now, feel the way that like Ron Paul supporters did for a long time. Like, hey, we've got a guy, he's got it figured out. It's like an enlightened view, and he's going to be the one to shake up the system. And then, they're going to feel mass disappointment when, he gets headed out of the race, or, nothing comes of it. And although I must say, I'm a much bigger fan of Ron Paul's ideas than Bernie Sanders. I got like 3 Ron Paul Revolution stickers on my truck, but
Nice.
I think there's this idea out there that like he's the guy that's going to change it, and I don't think people advocating for him understand what those changes are or what they mean.
Yeah,
So.
of course not. I mean, they don't. Yeah, when you say what is social, that's the other thing. When you're talking to people, it's a very good idea to establish basic definitions, right? Because if you don't understand, if the person you're talking to doesn't understand basic definitions, you're like talking on a different planet, different
That's
dimension with these people. You're saying government is violence, monopoly on force, and taxation is theft, and they're like, no, it's community. You got to pay your fair share of civic duty. I'm like, did you even hear what I just said?
No. You're like, oh, look at Venezuela right now. It's like, that wasn't true democratic socialism,
If Bernie Sanders was down there, he would have turned that place around in no time.
Yeah, I mean, it's This is an interesting time that we live in, although I imagine the world's probably always been this way, and I'm just awake enough now to notice it.
Well, and the other thing is, it's so beautiful with the internet that we can have these conversations, do these podcasts, and have a blog, and just and that's what gives me immense hope for the future is the rapid spread of information. Right.
Yep.
I think that's what really will bring about a great improvement in the status of the human race, because one thing that bad ideas the one thing that kills bad ideas quickly is exposure to people, exposure to sunlight. Just disseminate the bad ideas. Don't try to censor them, don't try to repress them, because you're just going to get met with more resistance, going to be violence and everything. Just let them just go out in the open. Socialism is great. Okay, now let's debate. write a book on it. Let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
So I think with this rapid spread of information, borders are breaking down, nationalism is breaking down. How can you salute? How can you hate people in the Middle East that we're told to hate by CBS, NBC, Fox, MSNBC, when you can Skype them, when you can chat with them through Facebook? You can't hate these people, because you just talk to them. You're like, do you guys want to come over here and bomb us? And they're like, no, I just want to go to work and raise my kids and feed them and give them a good education and tell them be good and don't hurt people. That's what I want to do.
I know, people around the world are remarkably similar, and it's I think you're right. The internet's going to be good for closing those gaps, and that was a really good segue. Actually, I want to ask you about some of the projects you're working on. Throw them out there so anybody listening can kind of look up some of the podcasts and blogs that you're running, because I know you're involved in quite a few.
Yeah, I started out with mine, peacefulanarchism.com, and I started writing for it, and then I started making videos for the Voluntary Virtues Network, which were just just me talking, and then they became interview style, which is really awesome, and now that's all I do.
Sure.
And so that's been pretty awesome, and I've been like, whew, I mean, there's it's amazing how many people I've met doing this. It's so fun. Because I would have had no reason to talk to these people if I didn't have a podcast, so it's a really awesome thing having a podcast. And then eventually Dave Painter and Jeremy Hengeller contacted me from Facebook, and they're like, let's start a podcast, another one. So we started Seize Liberty podcast. That was a year ago, maybe April, so around there. And that's been pretty awesome, and they've grown the page really well. And I also post videos on the Conscious Resistance Facebook page and YouTube channel. Yep. So I'm on those. And then I'm also trying to start a podcast with another woman, Melissa Rakovich, from Facebook, called the Peaceful Parenting. What was it called? The Non-Aggressive Parenting Podcast. So the NAP, Non-Aggressive Parenting Podcast.
Yeah. That's exciting.
Yeah. So but we haven't started yet. But we want to, because I think just the area of peaceful parenting and unschooling and homeschooling, there's so much content there to talk about that I think it deserves its own podcast.
Sure.
And because people have questions like, how do you do this unschooling? What do I do? Where do I learn more? Who's doing it? What's a typical day? What kind of curriculum do you use? All these kind of questions, right? And you have 2 kids or 1 kid?
We have 2
kids,
2.5 and a 7-month-old. So
right. So I assume you get these questions as well, right?
Yes and no. Not so much on the unschooling part, because I think people have this idea in their head that kids don't start schooling until they're 5.
Right.
But we're trying to. Gosh, I mean, it's just amazing. Every interaction with my daughter is framed through this lens of non-aggression, and that surprised me. And I'm really glad I learned about it before I became a parent, because I think that's massively changed the way I interact with my kids, and I think that's going to have a big difference on who they grow up to be as adults. And I have a ton of questions. I think one of the most influential people on my path towards voluntarism was the libertarian homeschooler. She's a friend of mine, Anna, and I started following her page 4 years ago, and she opened my eyes to an entirely different way of treating your children. That's just different than the traditional story. So I agree. There's a ton of material there you can work with.
So Jessica, you're saying that when your daughter cries, that she's not trying to deceive you and manipulate you into
I mean, sometimes she is, but then we have to figure out, like, okay, why are you manipulating me? Like, are you actually hungry, or is this a stalling tactic?
Wait, hold on. I'm talking about your infant.
Oh, my infant. Oh,
that's what I'm referring to.
I know, that's so silly to me. Like,
that's what I'm referring to, yeah.
Well, no, that cracks me up because, if one is crying versus the other, I know that one actually has, like, a legitimate need that I should attend to right now. Right, so it's like, okay, like, she's hungry, she's tired, she needs a diaper, or baby needs to be held. Right. Yeah, it's, oh boy, we never, these people that say, like, leave your kid and ignore them and whatnot.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There's like you said, a whole bunch of material you could unpack there, and I'm still learning as I go, but it's working out all right so far.
Yeah, that's what I like to tell people also is that, I don't have all the answers, and I don't claim to have all the answers, but what I strive to do is live in a principle way.
Yep.
I tried to find moral stance that is consistent and logical, and I try not to be hypocritical, and so every situation is different, every child is different, every family is different, every parent is different, right? So I don't tell people what to do. I don't tell people how to live their lives. I don't tell people how to raise their kids, right? I just give them principles, right? And you apply those principles to your own life. And you make the decision when to apply them and when not to apply them, right? I think too many parents are looking for this book, a manual of parenting. If your daughter wakes up at 4:30 in the morning, what do I do? Okay, turn to page 34. The answer is on page 34. I think a lot of mothers would kill for that book, but I'm sorry, it doesn't exist.
It's hard. It's like the hardest job in the world because it matters so much. I mean, the stakes are so high, and what could be more important?
Yeah, I mean, we are creating the future. When you're raising kids, you're creating the future, right? Because these kids will be the world of tomorrow. So, the way I describe this to people is treat your kids the way you want to see the world,
Oh, that's nice. I like that.
Because they will populate the world of tomorrow, right? So, you want to raise people who use violence to solve their problems, then use violence to solve your problem, But if you want to raise kids to use reason and have patience and gentleness and kindness and compassion, then you exhibit that, and your kids will model that. And and that's the best way to spread good ideas is by being the example, modeling yourself, right? You want to spread love,
living them out. Absolutely.
Right. So,
well, Danilo, we're pretty close to. I think I can hear the 7-month-old crying in the background.
Oh, all right. Got to get back to your peaceful parenting.
Into milk.
Okay.
But thank you so much for taking the time today. We'll have this posted in a couple days, so. For anybody listening, I want to give a shout out to Danilo's work online. Again, peacefulanarchism.com and the Seeds of Liberty podcast. And we'll be looking forward to your NAP for a parenting blog. And thanks so much for talking with us and branching out into this topic on our otherwise conscientious objector podcast.
Awesome, Jessica. Really, really enjoyed talking with you again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Danilo.
Take care.
Cell 411 is a free app for Android and iOS that replaces government-controlled 911. Cell 411 allows you to preset a group of friends or private organizations to show up in any emergency. Cell 411 is a nightmare for the state because it proves their so-called services aren't needed. Cell 411 has had thousands of installs, and of course it's covered by the BIPCOT no government license. Cell 411 because your friends won't shoot you when you're in trouble. Without the government, who would build the emergency services? You and Cell 411. Get it today at getcell411.com. That's getcell411.com.